Just a quick show of hands. How many people have been in to see the exhibition? Oh, quite well. I can go home then. So there's yeah, I mean, Prue mentioned that Rosalind co-curated the exhibition with me. She did most of the work on this exhibition. To be credit where credit's due. It's a fantastic exhibition. So much information in it. It's definitely a 2 or 3 visit job if you want to take in everything that's there. So sadly, Rosalind left yesterday, so you've got me, the understudy, tonight filling in. And I've also kind of borrowed Rosalind's talk, which she did for Milford-on-Sea Record Society a couple of weeks ago. But I have actually edited it slightly because I like the exhibition is absolutely packed with information. The talk was so packed with information, we'd be here until about 10 o'clock if I did it. How she managed to do it in 3/4 of an hour, I don't know. Anyway, you've got the edited version tonight. So the talk is sort of echoes the exhibition, really. To start with, I've got an outline of the history of the High Street. Then we're going to look at some of the businesses that have flourished there, and finally a few of the events for which the High Street has served as the backdrop. And of course the exhibition is based on the St Barbe Museum collections. Over the last 25 years or so, we've gathered quite a big archive of photographs and other ephemera, and we're particularly strong on the High Street, so it was a good choice of a subject to have a look at, and it's something that everybody knows and is important to the town. All right, here we go. Oh, there we go. Right, thank you. Right, begin at the beginning then, really. In 1200, Lymington was granted a charter by William de Redvers, who was the lord of the manor. In return for an annual fee and individual property rents, the new burgesses of Lymington were exempted from paying tolls and customs duties anywhere on de Redvers' lands. So this provided them with a commercial advantage, so tax breaks, in other words, for their business and trading interests. And then it also encouraged people to come and settle in the town. So it's a kind of 13th century free port, if you will. Perhaps most importantly for the future of the High Street, the Charter laid out a new borough. You can see on the plan behind me, that pink area at the bottom was the first borough set out by William de Redvers, based along a long straight street, which of course is our High Street. The High Street was lined with long, narrow burgage plots. I don't know if you can just about make them out there on either side. Each one of them 5.5 yards wide. They were all the same distance apart. The houses were set right on the street, and their gardens went back to fields. And in those properties, the burgesses could live, they could set up their shops to sell and trade in return for an annual rent of 6p, which is probably slightly less than the business rates are now. There we go. I said about the 5.5 yards wide, the perch. These are some properties down right at the bottom of the High Street, and if you still look there today, you can see that these properties, they all have that same measurement. So there's a little echo of the medieval town, if you like, those identically measured properties. In other places, they've been amalgamated and turned into bigger premises, but there you can still see them. So in medieval times, most of the houses were timber framed with plaster and wattle and daub panels. And although the designs changed over the years, the materials didn't particularly until the late 17th century. Some of the buildings would have been thatched, which was a slight fire risk, and others with tile or slate. And in the gardens, they had space for growing fruit and vegetables. There was room for stabling. They had wells for water and cesspits for their waste. And with the weekly markets, the movement of livestock and no sewerage system, the medieval town would have been or the medieval High Street would have been a fairly dirty and smelly place. Okay, this is a drawing of a fair at Lymington, drawn by Thomas Rollinson round about the late 18th century. And the other key thing around Lymington's charters was it granted the town the right to hold a weekly market and 2 annual fairs. And that wide, straight street was ideal for keeping all the market stalls in. The surrounding population could bring their animals, produce and fish to sell and trade, and buy the more specialist goods provided by Lymington's makers and craftspeople. They mainly sold live and dead stock from wooden stalls called shambles. Fish was also sold wet, salted, dried or smoked, and other stalls offered cloth, clothing, pots and pans and leather goods. Gradually, the demand for these kinds of services became such that it made sense to have them available on more than a weekly basis, and that was when the kind of the shops, the permanent shops, began to appear. A market cross was erected in front of the town hall in 1463, which stood in the road outside numbers 30 and 31. That's where the Marie Curie shop is today. And it remained there until about 1820. The weekly market was held around the market cross, and next to it were the whipping post, the stocks, and a well. So entertainment and refreshment all in one place. The market house was in a separate building adjoining the town hall, and inside it were kept the stamped weights and measures which were used to sort of make sure that the traders were behaving appropriately and not cheating people with the amounts that they were selling them. This drawing is by local historian Edward King, imagining what the town and its buildings might have looked like back then. The view is from the first town hall, looking towards the north side of the high street, and the second town hall, which was outside numbers 93 and 94, so that's Jules, as things stand today. Now, the market originally was held on Monday for many, many years, and as this poster shows us, this is a poster in the museum collection, it was changed to Saturday on the 1st of January 1867. Of course, has remained there ever since. But there's another little slice of history. I've skipped one there, I think. I've skipped two. Right, okay. I love the technology. Right, if you want to see some existing evidence of Lymington's medieval high street, then Osborne's is a very good place to start. If you want to go and have a good peer in there, you might have to buy a tie or something while you're having a browse. But go and have a look, because you can still see some of the timber frames and even some of the wattle door panels inside there. And if you look inside through the shop window and just look up above, you can see there are little beams sticking out, and those are the remains of a jettied frontage. You know, those medieval buildings where the first floor sticks out further than the ground floor, like you see in places like Winchester or I suppose Canterbury or York, those kinds of places. So the beams are still there, so although it's now got a Georgian frontage over the front, there's still the medieval interior or the medieval structure inside. And that's from a building dating to about 1480 to 1500. In this drawing here, made by Colborne in they were demolished in 1842, sorry. We get a little glimpse of an older Lymington. These are some Tudor cottages which stood at numbers 41 to 42. So that's next to Ashley Lane. So that gap on the right-hand side there is Ashley Lane running down the hill. And one notable resident of these cottages was Admiral Arthur Phillip, who many of you will have heard of. He rented one of the cottages there between 1798 and 1803 when he was commander of the Hampshire Sea Fencibles. Of course, he's best known for raising the flag for the penal colony, which became known as Sydney Cove in January 1788, which is still, that date is still Australia Day today, and to the Aboriginals, it's known as Invasion Day. There we are. Back to Thomas Rollinson again. We've got a few of his drawings scattered through this talk because they're this sort of unique record of what Lymington looked like back in the late 1700s. And here we see a fruit shop when he was down here visiting, and you can see the goods are displayed on tables outside. So, you know, open to the elements, open to the dust and the mud from passing traffic, and also to the light fingered as they were passing. Okay. Lymington's High Street probably didn't change a huge amount for a few hundred years after its establishment. I mean, there would have been individual properties that would have changed, things that burnt down or fell into disrepair. But it wasn't really until the Georgian period that it began to take on the appearance that we know today. At that time, Lymington was really prospering. The salt industry was bringing money into the town, and people could afford to improve their properties. So there were a lot of them that were refaced in brick or even rebuilt completely. So this view that we have up now is from 1832. It shows us from the bottom of the hill there, and you can see one of the town halls standing right in the middle of the road at the top of the high street there. A couple of things to point out here. You can see these sort of shop windows which have been now appearing as the ability to manufacture glass improved, and as it became cheaper, they could afford to have bigger panes, more glass, more windows, and a great way to display your goods without them getting weathered or stolen. Also, I don't know if you can see where that horse and cart is, about halfway up the high street, sort of across the street. There's actually a paved crossing point. So there would have been stone pavings across there. And down here in the bottom right, you can just about make out another one, a gentleman with a broom. So maybe he's the crossing sweeper to keep the mud and the dust off those, and that was a way of getting across the unmade-up road without getting your clothes all dirty. And you can also see sheep being driven up the high street there as well, so another reason to be careful where you are treading. Lymington's newfound prosperity is reflected in some of the surviving buildings like Bellevue House at number 48. This was built in 1765 as a townhouse for the Burrards of Walhampton. I love the idea that the Burrards of Walhampton needed a townhouse. Such a long way, isn't it, to come down the hill. But it's a very fine example of a Georgian private house on the high street, because of course the high street wasn't only about retail. There were lots of private residences and schools and other churches, of course, dotted along there. Charles St Barbe moved there with his family in 1828. He had established Lymington's first bank in 1788 and was mayor of Lymington 5 times between 1832 and 1848. After his death, the bank was run by his son, George Foster St Barbe, who you can see there on the right. He was a director of the Lymington Railway Company and was also mayor twice in the 1860s. The building was later used as a school and was taken over by more Blatch solicitors in the 1950s. And it's more Barlow today, as you'll all be aware. Whoops. Oh. Do you want to do them? All right, okay, thank you. Right, so another impressive Georgian mention here is Grosvenor House. So you see the building there on the left-hand side with that sort of grand pillared frontage. That was built in about 1830 for James Munro, who became mayor of Lymington in 1831. And according to the architect Roger Pinkney, the building is the most complicated design of a Regency front in Lymington. It marked an early house underneath. It was an excellent bit of work, but somewhat ruthless in that the windows did not always fit the floor levels inside. So it's all for show, but you might not actually have been able to look out the window if you were stood inside. But you know, a very, very grand and imposing house, and again, a kind of sign of the wealth that was in the town at that time. In the mid-19th century, it was a boys' school being run by Jane Smith, and after the school closed, it was occupied by a Mrs. F. St Barbe, another one of the family. She was living there in the 1870s. After her, there were a number of doctors who lived there, and it became vacant in the 1970s and was actually scheduled for demolition. But after protests and a sort of local outcry, the facade was preserved, although the building inside was gutted. And of course, now you've got, I think Millets is now tucked in underneath there, so that the bottom part of that frontage has gone. This is a lovely drawing here, packing up after a country ball by Caroline Bowles. She lived at Buckland and was married to the poet Robert Southey for a little while. We think it probably shows the assembly rooms next door to the Angel. And it's a real slice of Austin, isn't it? You can imagine this being a scene from Pride and Prejudice. So you've got those two gentlemen on the, I call them gentlemen, on the right-hand side, looking on at the ladies getting ready to go outside into the weather. And you can see through the doorway some of the servants are waiting outside with lanterns and umbrellas, so you know that the weather's not great out there. So what they're doing is they're putting patterns on their feet, little iron shoes that would keep their dancing pumps out of the mud. And also these elaborate calash bonnets that they're putting on to protect their hairstyles from the wind and the rain when they get outside. So the assembly rooms next to the Angel was used for balls and I think card playing, that kind of thing, and used for dances right up until the Second World War and a little bit after. I think it's now above, what's the clothes shop that's there next door to the Angel? The white stuff, is it? So that's where it is now, above white stuff shop. Okay, this is a view of the High Street from the church tower in the 1880s. And also, again, this gives you an idea of that sort of development of it as a shopping street and those sort of bow and bay windows that have begun to appear. There's Grosvenor House on the right-hand side and Bellevue House, the two grand houses we've just mentioned. And you can also just see the river in the distance, and I think there are masts down there as well that you can see. But it's a lovely, lovely, lovely photograph, again from the museum collection. This might be certainly one of the earliest photographs that we have. This is the High Street in 1870. Now, with the growing urban populations and better transport links at this time, there was sort of more demand for Lymington's high street shops. More people could get into the town, and the shops had a wider range of goods that could be brought in by road or by rail or by ship. The Victorian High Street at this time featured largely independent shops run by local families. Luxury goods were available from watchmakers, jewellers, glass, china dealers and booksellers. And there are also grocers, butchers, haberdashers, ironmongers and dressmakers to provide the essentials, while solicitors, banks and insurance companies served the population's legal and financial needs. And in this photo, you can see a donkey cart, just the donkey waiting patiently outside what was then Leonard Lewis's bootmakers at 23 High Street. And you can see the evidence of other horse-drawn traffic in the road there as well. As we move on, so we're kind of rattling through the centuries now. We're coming up into the 20th century, and this is Mac Fisheries. There might be people here that remember Mac Fisheries, yes? I won't ask for a show of hands, that would be unkind. Probably decorated for the coronation of George VI, I think. 1936 maybe when this was taken. We put this slide in really because of the arrival of the chain stores. This was sort of very much a 20th century phenomenon. Suddenly these stores that were nationally run began to appear in the high street. And of course this wasn't really good news for the locally run family businesses, because these chain stores had, they had much greater economic muscle. They could provide a wider range of goods more cheaply, so it was sort of providing competition for the local stores. The other downside, sorry, my notes here. Sorry, the other downside of this was that over time it led to kind of these sort of identikit high streets, so that wherever you went in the country you would come across the same sets of shops, and then towns lost their uniqueness and some of their appeal. But it was, it's something that was it happened in Lymington. It happened in every other town across the country as well. And sort of coming right up today then, thinking about that, Lymington High Street has fared better than many. It was interesting being at the Lymington Society meeting on Wednesday and hearing that actually some of the, I think when Rosalind, when the exhibition opened, Rosalind said there were 15 empty premises on the high street. And I think Don was saying on Wednesday night that at least 4 or 5 of those have recently been let, so that's good news. But it is difficult times for high streets across the country. Lymington's quite an affluent place. We've done better than many, but in places, you see there's lots of empty shops, declining visitor numbers, declining sales, and this is down to online shopping, the competition from online shopping. High business rates is often given as another reason, and of course the COVID outbreak was the last straw really, because everybody went online for their shopping because they didn't have much other choice at that point. So it's been tough for our high streets. And in response to this crisis, the government has been running inquiries, publishing reports, and making more funding available. And I'll just quote here from the Housing, Communities and Local Government Committee report, High Streets and Town Centres in 2030, which I'm sure you've all read. It was published in 2019, but it suggests that high streets can still thrive as long as they evolve, and they're saying that they should move away from a complete reliance on retail, which actually we've seen from this talk. It was the case before in years gone by. And they said, our vision is for activity-based community gathering places where retail is a smaller part of a wider range of uses and activities, and where green space, leisure, arts and culture and health and social care services combine with housing to create a space based on social and community interactions. That's quite a sentence, isn't it? I'm not going to comment on that, and we will see what the future might bring for Lymington High Street, but there's some interesting ideas there. Yes, I got thirsty suddenly for some strange reason. We're going to look at pubs on the high street now. This map here shows 7 of them, I think. So we're going to come up the south side of the high street from the bottom up to the church and back down the other side, which is what the exhibition does. So that little blue dot down on the far right-hand corner there was the Albion Inn, which was at number 10 High Street, run by William Thring and then his wife Louisa. Now, William was a very busy and multi-talented man. As well as being a vestry clerk, he also gave smallpox vaccinations. Obviously, we missed a trick, I think, in the pandemic. We could have had gone and have a pint, and waiting for your jab, have a quick pint. There we are, nothing new. And in 1894, sadly by 1894, the building had become vacant. We don't actually have any pictures of it in the museum, so if anyone does have a picture of the album, we'd be very pleased to hear from you. It's now been demolished, and it's the site, it's where the Masonic Hall is today. Okay, the next one then is the Nag's Head, which was an old coaching inn at number 34 High Street, so that's where Boots the Opticians is today. Many believe that this was once very heavily involved in the smuggling trade, and Jane Bays, who was the landlady there in the 1700s, also worked in the local excise office, which recorded all goods coming into the port, so a very useful job if you happen to be involved in smuggling. I'm sure it's pure coincidence. They had posting and livery stables to the rear of the pub, as well as greenhouses and gardens to supply the kitchens, which is the way that some pubs are moving today, interestingly enough. Now, the Nag's Head became the Lonsborough, which some of you may remember. Yes, yeah, there's a few a few hands there. The name was changed to the Lonsborough in 1884, and the story goes that this was after one of the visits of Edward VII to the town, and he came down with the Earl of Lonsborough, who was supposed to be in charge of the King's suite, was his job, but he apparently spent most of his visit at the Nag's Head. And allegedly, Edward VII said to him, I wonder that you don't call the place the Lonsborough, because he'd spent so much time there, and so they did. They changed the name. So there we are. This photo of the Lonsborough shows the Southampton coach waiting outside in 1894. In those days, it would take you 3 to 4 hours to make that trip. The hotel later catered for motorised transport, and Hanson Dorset Motor Services built a garage at the rear. This is one of the lesser-known pubs, I think, in Lymington, the Waltham Arms, based at number 51. So you can see this is an edit of that photo we just saw. So there's where Moore Barlow is, the big building on the left-hand side. So it's in between that and Grosvenor House there. The Waltham Arms was run as a pub from 1860 to 1943, and very appropriately run by a Mr. and Mrs. Beer in 1913. We're now on the other side of the road, number 82, which is where the Halifax is today. So this is the Bugle Hotel, which was there from at least 1675 until the 1960s. Anybody remember the? Yeah. So certainly within living memory. Parish meetings were held at this pub in the 18th century, and William Backhurst operated out of the backyard as a fly proprietor, which meant hiring out one-horse carriages. The Backhurst family later expanded their business and hired coaches from the Angel Yard, and we'll see a little bit more about that in a moment. I think some of you will remember this one too. Real trip down memory lane tonight. This was the Crown Inn at number 96, one of the most important coaching inns in Lymington from the mid-18th century. It was renamed the Anchor and Hope in the 1820s and burned down in 1905. So you can see the original building on the left, and the mock Tudor style that was rebuilt after it was burnt down. And it stayed up until the 1970s. I couldn't tell you exactly when it closed. Maybe somebody here could, but if that date is graved into your memory. There we go. Probably Lymington's most famous pub here, the Angel, number 108. Now, originally this building was called the St Christopher, which suggests it might have been a medieval inn, but we know for sure that it was established as the George Inn in about 1673, and first became known as the Angel in 1756. It too became an important coaching inn. The front of the building is Georgian. The interior is probably a little bit earlier, perhaps 17th century, with low ceilings and wooden beams. After the town hall was demolished in 1858, we'll look at town halls in just a moment, the council met in the assembly rooms next door. You can see them there on the right-hand side, and they carried on there for a little while. I'll talk about that again in a moment. But because they were meeting in the assembly rooms, they often made their official announcements from the balcony of the Angel. And this is actually the general election in 1910. So they're up there giving out the results from the election. And just look at the crowds outside. Can you imagine people getting that excited about a general election now? And also a little bit of sort of early 20th century health and safety. You might notice they've put wooden supports underneath the balcony. I'm not surprised with the number of people that have crowded on there. But what a fantastic photograph there. So we're now behind the Angel. This is the Angel Yard from a drawing by Thomas Rollinson, also from 1784. So the yard, in some ways, it hasn't changed that much. The buildings on the right-hand side, I think, are much as they appear in this drawing. The Angel had stabling for about 18 horses, with corn stores and haylofts and an ostler's house to match. There was a tap room, a brew house, a pigsty. The pigs got fed on the leftovers from the brewing process. There were carriage sheds, coach sheds, and access to the cellars for beer and wine. And I think also that the servants for some of the people visiting the hotel also ended up in some of the accommodation over the stables as well. There was also a privy at the far end of the yard. And there's one of those coaches. During the 1820s and 30s, there were 6 different coaches operating from the Angel Yard, running from Lymington to Southampton and then on to London. And if you were travelling to London by coach in those days, you could look forward to a 12-hour journey. I bet you'd be glad to get out by the time you arrived. Thank you. Once cars took over from horses, Backhurst and Sons began running their coach service from the Angel Courtyard. You can see the sign over the door on the right-hand side there. They'd moved from the back of the Bugle that we saw just a moment ago. And Tammy Neal, the pony and boot boy based at the Angel, was actually the first person to drive a motor bus around the town. Backhurst buses and brakes ran daily, except Sundays, between Lymington and Milford. And you can see 2 of them here with their drivers. Again, a lovely, lovely, lovely photo. That was 1910, that one was taken. The last of our pubs then, this is the Red Lion at number 113. I think it was previously the White Lion, and now it's the Thai Tapas restaurant, in case you're wondering. Right, a little bit of a digression into town halls here, because it's worth mentioning. There were several town halls. We got 3 spots on this map here which shows you where they were. The first one was situated outside numbers 30, 31 High Street, so that's where the blue circle is on this one. Built in about 1463. A second town hall was built in 1684, just in front of 93 High Street, so that's where the red circle is, which is quite close to the junction with New Street. The building for that one was supported on stone columns with a town hall on the upper floor and a corn market underneath. And those stone columns, are they still there at Woodside Gardens? Yeah. Yep, okay, so they're surviving. There's a little bit of that town hall that still survives. So that town hall had remained in use until 1710 when this one was built right in the middle of the road. And you can just about see, there's the Angel Hotel just to the right of it there, to give you a sense of where it was. That's what he is. Yes, and this one was financed by Paul Burrard of Walhampton, so who had an interest in politics locally. It was also demolished in 1858 to improve access along the road. Can you imagine if you were trying to get up and down Lymington High Street with that in the middle of the road today? That would be quite the task. When they knocked that one down, They didn't build another one until 1913, 1858 to 1913, and they were obviously very, very comfortable in having all their meetings next door to the Angel. And this was the result down at what's now Early Court. So they decided to build a new town hall there. The existing buildings weren't suitable, so they demolished them. A grant from the properties were bequeathed to the town by Martha Early, hence Early Court, and her sister-in-law actually paid for the construction of the town hall. It was built by Samuel Elgar and Son. You can see from the signs there. This is the laying of the foundation stone ceremony, which is why you've got some of the councillors lined up in front and the town band here in the foreground. And as I say, the contractor that was building them was Samuel Elgar and Son. They had this shop opposite, more or less opposite where that was. The business had been set up by Samuel Elgar in 1830. He was a decorator, plumber, builder, and undertaker. Another interesting combination. And the business continued until Peter Elgar retired in 1985. And there it is, there's the finished town hall. So that lasted until about 1966, when the present town hall on Avenue Road was opened. So this one too was demolished. There's a lot of casualties amongst Lymington's town halls. Okay, so we're now going to look at some of the shops along Lymington High Street. Just a sort of a few highlights. This is, I think this is one of my favourite photographs in the museum collection. It's John Topp's butcher's shop, and if you're trying to get your bearings, this is where the buttery is today. So yes, quite a change, really, all in all. He ran the butcher shop there from the 1880s to around about 1930. He had an open shop front, and you can see him, that's John Topp, stood there in his apron, just by the doorway with two of his assistants and probably an apprentice on the right-hand side. You can see it there with the carcass. So it had an open frontage. There were no windows or anything. They just put shutters across when it wasn't being used, but you've just got all the meat hanging there. Somebody suggested to me once that this was actually a Christmas shot, and that these are geese lying on the table on the right-hand side with sprigs of holly on the top. So maybe that's true, which would give you a little bit more confidence about all that meat being left outside for any length of time. And oh yes, and the other thing to mention, of course, is what was known as Topp's Terrace down the right-hand side there, leading down to Topp's Yard. There was an abattoir behind the butcher's shop there, so just off the high street in those days, which seems quite strange by modern standards. And actually, if you duck your head in through that archway, you can still see some of the hooks where the meat was hung up from, still in the wall there. And we've got an oral history recording in the collection from a lady who used to live in one of those properties down Topp's Terrace, and she remembered being a small child being absolutely terrified by the animals being driven past her front door, because they used to bring, some of them used to come over from the Isle of Wight on the ferry, be driven up the high street and then round the back to be slaughtered. So it must have been, for a small person, must have been quite distressing. Okay, the Southant stores. This was actually the first chain store to arrive in Lymington. The chain was founded by Robert Bentley Purchase in 1829 as a high-class grocery business, and it came to 25 High Street in 1858. That's where W.H. Smith's is now, if you're trying to get your bearings. The business was taken over by James Willis, that's him there on the right-hand side. He took it over in 1919, and from that time it traded as Willis and Son Southant Stores, a family grocers. Anybody here remember Willis's? Yeah? Fondly? Yeah. The shop survived until the 1970s, and we've got a quote here from someone who remembered going there. They said, "It was a lovely old-fashioned grocer's where the customer was treated with courtesy. It had an ambience no other shop had. My recollections are of going downstairs into an old timbered building which had the smell of sides of bacon hanging from hooks and the large tins and containers of tea and coffee. We hadn't been in Lymington long, and before we knew it, it was gone, and a modern supermarket was built in its place," which is Tesco, when they had a branch on the other side of the road. And of course, shopping, Sorry, I should have moved it onto that slide. So there you are. That's what they were talking about. That's a proper shop, that, isn't it? And of course, you know, in those days, when you were shopping somewhere like that, you didn't just go in and take what you wanted. You went to the counter and you were served. And if you wanted things had to be weighed and measured. So it wasn't necessarily a quick process. And of course, when the supermarkets came in, they did for all this because they were, you know, it was quick, it was convenient, it was self-service, the food was cheaper, there was a wider range of goods available, and so, you know, these types of shops went under. But what was lost was that kind of sociable, personal service that you had in those days. And really, that style of shopping would not have been unfamiliar to someone in Victorian Lymington, that way of going in and dealing with the staff to get what you wanted. Right, another family-run business was Rand's. Quick show of hands. Who remembers Rand's? Yes, lots of people. So they were set up. They set up shop at number 43 in 1910s. Now I'm sure no one actually remembers that. William Boothby Rand had founded the business at 7 St Thomas Street originally in 1876, selling hats and underclothes for women and children. By the time this photo was taken in the 1930s, they branched out into women's clothing as well. You see all those lovely 1930s cloche hats on display there. And there's a photograph there. Now, I don't know if I'm right here, but there's a sign in the window that says birthday celebration there. Now, if we're saying that the business was founded in 1876 in St Thomas's Street, I would think this is probably 1976, perhaps. It looks about right with the flares and the hot pants. I think we can probably believe that. And, you know, by this time, Rand's had a reputation for selling high-class fabrics from all over the world. It was finally sold in 1982, but you can still see the sign for the business on Ashley Lane. You can just about glimpse it there on the left-hand side. So if you're walking along the high street, do have a look, and you'll see that naming of Rand's up there. And the family are still in Lymington. Right, we couldn't do a talk about shops in Lymington and not mention Elliott's. Another one of our family-run businesses, still going strong. The company was founded as the Lymington Clothing Mart in 1872 at number 87 by George Elliott, who came from Dover with his wife Elizabeth. By the time Elizabeth died in 1893, their son Edward had joined the business, and they had moved to new premises at 44 to 46 High Street, so they'd come across the road, basically. This photo is from about 1890 with George Elliott there standing in the doorway. The business aimed to attract a high-class clientele, I think they would say that still today, employing their own tailors and carrying out boot and shoe repairs from a workshop in Ashley Lane. By the 1920s, they had branches in Lyndhurst, Brockenhurst, Freshwater, Highcliffe and New Milton. But when Edward Elliott died suddenly in 1948, it was rather a shock because in his will, he directed that Elliott should be disposed of and the proceeds dispersed to St Thomas's Church, the Masonic Lodge and various employees. So the family, led by his daughter Peggy, who he had never wanted to be involved in the firm, they fought to save the business, and they did succeed. They had to downsize. They lost all but the Lymington and Lyndhurst branches, but they did manage to keep going. And by the 1960s, they were on an even keel once again. The Lymington store is the only one left now, but still has its sort of prominent position and reputation on the high street, and is now being run by the 5th generation of the family. So that's quite remarkable, really. Oh, 1 minute. Fords. Anybody remember Fords? Yes, jolly good. Another long-lived family firm founded by Charles Ford, who opened his first furnishing shop at St Thomas Street in about 1840. So you get a sense of these family businesses did run for a really long time. They were fixtures on the street, not the kind of turnover that we perhaps see today. So they then spread into 60 and 62 High Street, as you see here, from the 1900s. One resident remembered, people like to have a Ford's van seen outside their house. Ford's was the best. And before the advent of motor vehicles, as you can see here, they used to have their horses that pulled their wagons for them, were stabled in Church Lane, and they were grazed on the field, which is now covered by M&S car park. Klitz is another one of our sort of long-standing family businesses, founded in 1789, would you believe, by George Phillip Glitz with a G, who was a refugee from Hesse in Germany. He later changed his name to Klitz with a K. He started off the business actually from a house in Captain's Row, and he would go around the whole area, including the Isle of Wight, on horseback selling music. The shop moved to 88 High Street in 1840, where it sold musical instruments and sheet music. And the whole family were very musical. They were the organists at St Thomas's Church for over 50 years. Klitz's succeeded with moving with the times. They started selling radios from the mid-1920s and TVs from 1952. And Raymond Klitz, who later took over the business, also built 2 listening booths in the shop so that young people could go in there and listen to the latest records and hopefully buy them as well. And he also carried out repairs to pianos and gramophones in the workshop behind the building. I think, I'm not quite sure when Klitz's disappeared, 1980s, do you think? Yeah, late 70s, early 80s. King's. Even I remember King's, actually, even as a newcomer to Lymington. Another very long-established family business, founded in 1805 when Charles King started his printing works and bookshop at 126 High Street. In 1817, he was joined by his nephew Richard, who walked here all the way from Yeovil. By the 1820s, Richard King was publishing on his own account, and in 1828 produced a guide to Lymington that ran to a number of editions. We've certainly got copies of that at the museum. Richard was also a councillor, an alderman, and he was mayor of Lymington 5 times. His son Edward carried on the business at 105 to 106 High Street, living with his family above the shop. But by 1881, it had been taken over by his sons, Richard and Charles. Now, this photograph was taken in 1877. So that is, I think that's Edward on the right-hand side with the top hat on. And then his sons, Richard and Charles, standing in front of the shop there. And these are some of the printers from the print works lined up on the pavement as well. Again, another fantastic early photograph. After Richard moved to London to open his own business as a printer and publisher around 1890, Charles continued to run King's, assisted by his daughters. And when he died of pneumonia in 1914, his wife Annie took over the business, joined by their son Edward at the end of the First World War when he finished his military service. After Edward's death in 1972, his 2 daughters, Mary and Janet, many of you will know Janet, I think, continued to run the business until it was sold in 1988 to 4 staff members. Now, after that, it became Ottakers, and now, of course, it's Waterstones. Bennett's? Anybody? Yeah. Yes. Another fixture on the High Street for many years. Bennett's was a drapers and soft furnishers and complete outfitters based at 110 to 111 High Street, as you can see in this photograph here. And they were based there from the 1860s to the 1950s, so nearly 100 years on the High Street. It's quite something, isn't it? One side of the shop sold clothes and the other side household goods. And this is the last of the shops. So this is Figures, another one that's still going and still in family hands. Founded in 1904 as a cycle business by Herbert Edward Figures. By 1913, it was running from 123 to 124 High Street and expanded to selling china, glass and hardware. By 1924, it was also in 122 High Street and was selling televisions and electricals too. By 2002, the business sold toys out of 121 High Street as we know it today, and electricals at 122 to 123, and bicycles at 124. Quite the empire by that stage. Today, while the electrical business has disappeared, the toy shop is still going strong. I know it's one of my boys' favourite shops in Limington for many years. So they're still selling toys from 123. There's a craft shop at 121, and then the bicycles are in Henderson Court behind. So Elliott's and Figures still going strong. This is a little, this isn't a shot, but we just popped this one in because it's just quite interesting as well. You know what was the post office is at the moment. Before the post office was there, it was Home Mead, which was a private house. We've got another photograph of this in a moment. But this is it during the First World War. Because it was taken over by the military as a hospital for wounded soldiers. Between 1914 and 1918, about 3,000 of them were treated there. It was staffed by the Voluntary Aid Detachment with the help of several trained nurses under Elizabeth Chinnery, who is the lady in the nurse's uniform on the left-hand side there. She was the wife of Surgeon Edward Fluder Chinnery, who worked from Monmouth House in St Thomas's Street. And a lot of the soldiers that were treated there came from Canada and New Zealand, and certainly New Zealand troops came back to Lymington after the First World War. I think they presented a flag. We've got a photograph in the collection somewhere of them presenting a flag at the town hall. So there we are. Thank you. Right, we're on to the home straight now. So just to round off, I've just put some nice photographs of the High Street in, because the High Street has been, it's the major thoroughfare in Lymington. It's been the backdrop for all kinds of events and occasions. This is 1881, the Great Snowstorm, and it really was a great snowstorm. A lot of the local villages were cut off because the snow drifted into the lanes and filled them up to the top of the hedgerows. And you can just see how much snow there is there, and that they've cleared it from the middle of the street to these huge piles on either side. Now, that's all very well until it thaws, isn't it? And there were a number of properties that were quite severely flooded when all this began to thaw. It's hard to imagine weather like that these days, really, but there we are. Fantastic photo. Okay, this is the parade for Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in 1897. And it shows this long procession coming up the High Street, obviously taken from the church tower looking down. There's the cross on the end of the roof there. And I don't know if you can see, there are soldiers in the procession. There's the town band, town councillors and lots of people, and the flags of all nations all down the High Street. Again, another lovely photograph of Lymington in the sun. It's funny, these sepia photographs, it always looks like it's overcast, but it's actually a lovely sunny day by the looks of things. Hospital Sunday parades. So this is down the bottom of the High Street this time. I'll use my pointer here. You see, there is Top's Butcher's shop with the shutters closed. None of the meat hanging up at that moment there. The Hospital Sunday parades it's a fundraising event for the local hospitals. So people would walk through Lymington, through the local villages to raise money. And you can see everyone in their Sunday best, all in that, look at those straw boaters and all those lovely frocks and hats, obviously having a lovely time. And this sense of the community coming together in the High Street, I think it's an interesting thing that this is the place where things happened and that people remembered things happening. We saw the general election results earlier. Here's the Hospital Sunday parade. There was Queen Victoria's Jubilee celebrated. All of these things, unfolded on Lymington's High Street. And this is the Thanksgiving parade at the end of the First World War. So the town hall that we saw that was built in 1913, they're outside the town hall here. So you've got a guard of honour of all the local firemen there, and there's the mayor. I don't know if you can see the mayor standing just in between them there as the carriages come down the street. Now, it's obviously been raining because the street's looking quite muddy and rutted, and it's got that kind of sheen to it. One point of interest, if you've been into the exhibition, did you notice there was a bright red jacket with lots and lots of buttons on it, which was a postillion's jacket from the Backhurst family? There we are. So there is someone from the Backhurst family wearing either that jacket or a very similar one back in 1918. So you can see that still, bright scarlet if you come and see it in the exhibition. A fantastic Union Jack waistcoat on display as well there. And tops again. It's tops in every. It gets in every photo. Okay, this is Second World War. Now, this is Warship Week, so it's a fundraising event. Lymington sponsored a Royal Naval ship, the HMS Obedient, which I think was a destroyer, and so they had a regular fundraising events to raise money for the war effort. And this is outside, you know, I said about Home Mead just now, where we had the convalescing First World War troops, and that was in the back, and this is the front of Home Mead, so that's where the old post office, as it is now, stands. And you can see them there up on their sort of scaffolded promontory there. Looks like somebody from the Navy making a speech, and you can see there are sailors down here. Looks like they've got rifles and fixed bayonets there. They're doing the whole works there. Lots of kids. It looks cold. Everyone's got their overcoats on and their collars up, and there's a kid in a balaclava down here somewhere. So it looks like a cold day. Anyway, but raising money for Lymington's ship. And there's a site you don't see anymore. So after the 1964 New Forest Act, when they brought in the cattle grids and the fencing, this couldn't happen anymore. But if you visited Lymington in the 1950s, you might see something like this. So a couple of ponies just outside Bales. So that's next door to the Masonic Hall, if you're wondering where it is. Quite what they're feeding the ponies from a tobacconist's, I do not know, but obviously give it a bit of a kick. There we go. This is 1966, so after Lymington had disposed of yet another one of its town halls, the Queen came down to open the new one on Avenue Road, and this is her sort of motorcade coming down the High Street. The thing that strikes me is there's not actually a very big crowd outside. You know, I didn't think of Lymington as a hotbed of republicanism, but there doesn't seem to be a mass of people there. But anyway, there's the Queen coming down. There's the Anchor and Hope pub that was mentioned earlier. You've got Langham Brown's there, where Costa Coffee is today, and Timothy White and Taylor's where Boots is now. So again, another nice little snapshot of Lymington in the 1960s, which obviously I'm too young to remember. I'm certainly too young to remember this. This is a fantastic photograph, isn't it? The circus coming to Lymington. You can see there's camels. You see that great line of ponies going back, and there are the circus wagons in the distance, just coming along the street there. You know, and you can imagine the excitement, you know, how exotic that must have been. This must be round about 1900, 1910, that sort of period. You know, it was not every day that you saw camels in Lymington High Street then. I know we're blasé about this sort of thing now. You see camels all the time, but not then. And my very last slide, even better than camels. Elephants in Lymington High Street. Now that you definitely don't see every day. And again, we're assuming this is the circus arriving in Lymington for a performance. So the elephants are fantastic. Also worth noting, look at all the awnings on the shops on the northern side. So obviously the north-south facing side. So this is to keep the sun off their goods in the shop windows there. There's the pub again. Here, the Mock Tudor pub here on the left. This is the Covent Garden stores of fruiterers, so another chain store that had come into Lymington, the Borough stores, and next to it there is Rickman's coal merchants. So again, you know, it's not something that we would see now, but the shops in the high street, of course, reflect the society at the time. You know, so people needed coal to heat their homes then, and so it's perfectly reasonable there should be a coal stores on the high street. And if you look at some of the properties that were around, say in about 1900, you've got saddlers, harness makers, there's corn merchants, and you remember that Lymington was still a very compact town in those days, serving a largely rural population, and everything was horse-drawn, so you had what you needed. Today we've got mobile phone shops and gift shops, souvenir shops and charity shops, and lots of coffee shops. So I don't know what that says about in reflection of our society, but you know, it's interesting if you look at what businesses have been on the high street at different times, you get a feel for what people have needed. Of course, the staples have been there all the way through, but those are some of the things that have changed. So if you've not seen if this has whetted your appetite and you've not seen the exhibition, it runs until the 23rd of April. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm going to ask, well, Martina's come in with a question already. So what would you like to ask?
My taxi driver asked me what burgage meant, but can I also give you a little bit of information? Mm-hmm. The camels and the elephants came to Lymington by train, and they didn't come to Lymington, they were on their way to Pennington.
Oh. Quite right too, yes indeed.
You have to get your Pennington plug-in, yes. Birdage.
Burgage. Well, I think it's related to the term burgesses. So the people that took up those plots were burgesses, and they had their burgage plots. I think is that right, Tony? Do you?
Well, we get another word, bourgeoisie, don't we?
Ah. Right. But I think that's the relationship. It's between burgage, burgesses, borough. It's those people taking up those plots in the medieval period.
David.
Steve, could I just comment? I've always understood that Bellevue House was built by the St Barbe family because in the winter the river would be impossible to get over from the other side. So they lived in the town in the winter.
Okay, right. Did you all hear that? So David's saying that the Burrard family, the reason that they had Bellevue House as their townhouse was because it was could be difficult crossing the river in the winter. So they lived there in the winter and used Woolhampton as their kind of summer type residence, I suppose. Yeah, thanks David. I didn't realise that. Thank you.
We've got somebody at the beginning of next year coming to talk about Woolhampton House, now school. Any other questions? Yes.
Our neighbour told us that he, in fact, he used to collect the elephant dung from our garden, and we live just south of Daniel's Walk. So I think at some stage the circus must have been actually in the town itself in the very early days.
I think, Mike, you said to me, Fairley Road. So it sounds like the circus might have been in different places at different times then.
There's a question at the back.
No, sorry, I was going to say, could you speak up? We didn't hear the question.
Sorry, we're trying to get the microphone around the room. It was
about elephant dung, Susan. Owen, where did you say where did you say it was?
Well, we live in Bingham Drive, which is just south of Daniel's Walk.
So Owen was saying they found elephant dung in Bingham Drive near Daniel's Walk. Martina says that the circus was at Pennington, and Mike tells me that the circus was at... Yeah. So I think we're saying the circus is in more than one place, but there's definitely elephant dung around the town.
Because he used to put it on his rhubarb. That's what he told us.
Right. Yeah. A top tip for gardeners there. Elephant dung on your rhubarb.
Any more questions or comments? That was absolutely fascinating, Steve. Thank you very much. I hope it's all given you all a really good taster, and if you haven't seen the exhibition, do go and see it, because it does need a few visits. There's a lot to absorb. But it was brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve.